So before we get started with this week's episode, I want to talk about my friend Neil Taff. Neil appeared very early on in the show. He was on episode 22. And Neil and I grew up, I feel like maybe 6 houses apart. We're on the same block. He and his brothers, Kevin, Morris, and Dwayne. And he was a fantastic guy. Very funny, very quippy, very sarcastic, very warm, very loving. And, we lost him just a couple days ago. And my heart hurts for his friends. Neil was an actor and singer and musician, had a ton of friends in the theater and Broadway world, was also a backup singer for Gladys Knight. So send my condolences to Gladys and that whole crew. He also leaves behind a mother, and my heart absolutely breaks for Miss Taff, who has lost 2 children prematurely. I life is short, right? We say that all the time. We try to take that to heart when we can, and it's just really important to be your best self, be your truest self, which Neil was an absolute exemplar of as a man of faith, as a queer black man of faith. I know the road was hard for him to get there, but he absolutely understood and fulfilled the assignment. Morris, I love you. I'm thinking about you, and I hope that you rest well, sir. Well done. Welcome to Detoxicity. By men, about men, for everyone. This is a podcast that's attempting to remix the narrative around masculinity, and I thank you for listening and supporting. If you're new to the podcast, I hope you check out the archive, which contains over 150 episodes. I'm always happy when someone reaches out with a friendly word or constructive criticism, so never hesitate to hit me up either via IG at DetoxPodGuy or via email, detoxpod@gmail.com. You can also contact me if you're interested in being a guest on the show or if you know someone who might be a good guest for the show. There's also a Detoxicity Patreon. Patrons get episodes 1 week early, plus I will mail you a cool DetoxPod fridge magnet. Go to bit.ly/DetoxPodPlus to find out more. Oh, one more thing. Late last year, I completed my certification courses, and I am now a life and relationship coach. I'm taking clients. Go to mike-joseph.com and book a free consultation. Thanks for listening. I really do appreciate you. Hey everybody, in this episode I am talking to Brian Wilkins. Brian is a music industry educator and executive. I had the pleasure of working with Brian almost 2 decades ago, back when we were both kids, and we have stayed in touch throughout the years, but really reconnected earlier this year at the Folk Alliance conference. Brian mentioned to me that he really enjoys listening to the podcast, and I proposed the idea of him being on it, and he accepted. So here we are. Brian and I talk about his upbringing, growing up and being in the music industry, the culture shock of being in New York, finding your calling, figuring out what is your calling, and keeping yourself in shape. Brian is in very good shape, and it's just a wide-ranging conversation, as the conversations on Detoxicity typically are, and I hope that you enjoy this chat that I have with Brian. So here we are.
My name is Brian Wilkins. I am a music business professional, and more recently a music educator. And I go back a long time with you, my friend.
We've known each other for quite some time.
Yes, we have. I manage artists and producers. I live here in Los Angeles. I also teach music business, and I run a music camp at the Frost School of Music at the University of Miami. I'm more excited to be here talking to you today. We've talked a long time about this, and I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, man. I love the arc of our acquaintance where, we met because we worked together. I want to say this is now going back probably like 17, 18 years.
Yes.
And we all did different things. I moved away. You got different jobs. We were sort of still, because of social media, still kind of privy to each other's lives. But then we ended up at the same conference earlier this year. We ended up at Folk Alliance together. So it was my first time seeing you in person in some time.
Yeah.
and you were just like, "Oh, I love the podcast." Which normally, when somebody walks up to me and is like, "I love the podcast," I'm like, "You're bullshitting me." You like if you're a
Right.
friend of mine, and
Right.
you're like, "Oh, Mike, I love the podcast." I'm like,
Uh-huh.
"You're just saying this because you know how passionate I am about it."
Right.
But you had nothing to gain from being like, "Oh, Mike, I love the podcast," and you were very sincere about that. So I approached you and I was like, "Would you ever consider being a guest on the podcast?" And you were like, "Of course." So that is how we ended up here. But as I was thinking about the time that I've known you, I was like, Brian's somebody I've known for a long time, but I don't know that I know Brian,
Right. Right.
right?
Mhm.
Most of our conversations have either been in the context of work or in the context of like a Facebook message or an Instagram DM or something like that. So I
Yep.
am sort of curious, like, A, where did you come from? B,
Mhm.
what was your upbringing like? And C, what put you in the music business?
Yeah, well, I was born in a small town called Henderson, North Carolina, which is about the middle of the state, about an hour outside of Raleigh. Small, rural, southern community. I got really interested in music. Well, I have to say, both my parents were very much, we had music in the house growing up. And my parents split when I was young, but when I was at either one of their houses, there was always some music playing. They were both big music fans. So that certainly had an impact on me. And then when I moved, we moved to a different neighborhood and I heard some music. Like I was literally out in the backyard and I heard some guitar playing coming. And I had no idea. I knew obviously what a guitar was, but I had no sense of what that was. And we started hanging out and he was like, you should play bass and we should start jamming. And I had no clue how to do that. Like I didn't even really know what a bass was. So we went to a music shop together and I'd saved up some money and we went to a music shop. We got to the music shop and we were looking at basses and the salesperson there was like, you'd have more fun if you guys were both playing guitar. And so that started me playing guitar and that started me really being interested in music more than just listening to it and trying to learn songs and doing all that.
And how old are you at this point?
Probably 13, 12 or 13 at
Okay.
this point. Yeah. Uh-huh.
All right.
Before
All
that,
right.
it was, skateboarding and bike riding and small mischief and stuff like that. Like
Small
yeah, small
mischief.
mischief, nothing too terrible. But that really kind of cemented it for me. And then I became really interested in music. And then we had, of course, a decent cover band that we got together. And luckily for us, our drummer's father was in an actual band that played beach music and things like that. And so they allowed us to practice literally in their garage on Sundays. And so we were the quintessential garage band. We were in the garage. Um, and we actually kept that going through college. I mean, we had a couple of members fall out and a couple of other people join. Um, but yeah, we played in my college town, and we played a few clubs and we started writing our own things and we recorded and it was a lot of fun, man. It kept that music passion for me going.
Nice. Was music always a hobby, or did you have aspirations on being a professional, quote unquote, professional musician?
I think at one point when I didn't know any better, I had aspirations of becoming a professional musician. I think the more I learned about music and understood what I didn't know and met people who really were much more technically advanced than I was, I think it became something where like, okay, this is fun for me, but I don't know that I have the skill set to do this as a profession, you know? So I would say, yeah, my dreams were crushed maybe in my junior year of college.
Or maybe you were just smart enough to do what a lot of other people don't and realize the limitations that are on their talent and the high barrier to entry
Yes.
to
Yeah,
become a professional musician. And we're like, you know what? I'm going to do something else.
absolutely, man. That's pretty much what it was. I knew what I didn't know. And I also, I got really interested in radio at the time and I joined college radio and I started going down that road when I had a on-air show and with a friend of mine who's in the music industry who we're best friends to this day.
That's
So
awesome.
that kind of took me on another path.
And I mean, I guess you kind of already started answering the question, but your transition into the music business, I wonder about that sometimes because when I was a kid, when I was a teenager even, I didn't really know what people in the music industry did. I knew that people put out records
Hmm.
and they got on the radio and people bought them, they got into record stores, but I didn't know how all of that happened until I was actually working in the music
Right.
industry.
Right.
So, as opposed to me who kind of fell into
Hmm.
it, was there like pre planning involved in you becoming a member of the music industry?
Well, radio for sure. Like I really enjoyed the radio and being in radio, but I didn't know that much either. And I had met a few managers because we would interview bands that came through and did the college radio thing. So I
Sure.
met a few industry professionals that way and I had a little understanding of that part of it. But I didn't have a great understanding of like, okay, college radio, it's mostly fun and you just play the songs you want to play and you have specialty shows and it's a great time. And I didn't have the understanding of what commercial radio was until I got out into it, you know. So I was kind of like a little bit like you in a sense that I was kind of just feeling my way around. I knew I wanted to be involved in music and I knew I had enough background with what I did in college radio to hopefully be able to land a job somewhere. So that's kind of what was that next step for me.
And was your college experience also in North Carolina or was it elsewhere?
It was at North Carolina. It was East Carolina University. It was a great time, a great school for me to be at that time. Oddly enough, Harvard didn't accept me. No, I didn't even apply. I didn't even apply, but yeah,
Damn it.
I know,
Uh,
right?
right. I think about this sometimes. College is a really transformative time for a lot of people because it's the first time that they're out of their comfort zone,
Hmm.
right? You grow up in a place, you're used to seeing the same people over and over, being in school with the same people, elementary school, middle school, high school, whatever. And then you go away, and it's like, unless you grow up in a big city, particularly, it's like the world becomes significantly bigger.
Yes.
And I don't know a whole lot about North Carolina. I don't know if there was a significant difference between what you experienced as a young person just kind of in your hometown versus going to college and having sort of larger experience.
Yeah. Well, East Carolina is one of the bigger schools as far as just the population goes in the state. Um,
Okay.
It was also the quote unquote party school. That had nothing to do with my decision though, Mike. But yes, it definitely opened up a lot for me. And I think this is true. And it's what I love about working with students today. It's such a time in your life that your world changes, like you said, and you meet so many people and so many people from different walks of life. And you're all sharing somewhat of a common sort of interest and time in your life, which is unusual, right? Like you don't really have that discovery point too many other times in life. I mean, certainly,
Nah.
we went to New York City and that was a whole different discovery point, right? But being in that time period of your life with people that are also in that place, there's just something about that it's hard to replace that. And when I talk to students, especially artists and musicians, and it's like, well, I could be in LA right now, or I could be in Nashville right now. And it's like, yeah, you could absolutely, but you're not going to get this time back with these people at
Right.
this point of your life. And so, yeah.
I can only think of myself as a college age student,
Hmm.
and I wouldn't have even had the foresight to think of something like that. Like it was kind of all about the moment
Oh, yeah. I
and not really kind of about looking back and being like, oh, I should have cherished this moment because these things happened that will never happen again.
Absolutely. And me too. The same, right? And I don't think even students today, it's the same thing, right? Like, can you imagine if you and I were thinking about, okay, what are we doing into our midlife? We're not thinking about that at that
Right.
point. And your relationship with time and age is so different then too. So of course you're not thinking about that. I don't know what I was thinking about. Probably not enough of my classes, that's for sure. Like, my
Right.
mind wasn't where it
Right.
should have been, that's for sure.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. So, I mean, the message of that, I guess, is if there are any young people listening to this, know that in 20 or 30 years, you're going to be having these thoughts as well.
Yep. And
Um,
you miss it.
oh,
Right.
absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. I mean, I can't say that I had the easiest sort of 18 to 21 period,
Hmm.
but I wish my body felt the same way now that I did then. I mean, there are lots of things that I
Yeah,
miss,
yeah,
you know.
yeah, totally. And you find a lot of people get into their first serious relationship, and there's all kinds of other things that happen in good, bad, and indifferent in that time. It's such a time capsule, if you will.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to talk about a little bit more about your career in education in a
Mhm.
second. But what brought you to New York? And what was that like for you?
Oh wow. Well, I was lucky enough to get a position at a radio station in Raleigh, North Carolina, not too long after college. And I was really interested in what was happening at that time online. And this was the early days of radio stations even having websites. And because I was the new fresh kid out of college, they're like, well, let the kid figure out what's going on the websites. So I had a real passion for that. And this was also the first .com boom, the very first one before the bubble burst. And a
Mm-hmm.
company that had started up, they were building like stores for radio stations to be able to sell their merch and everything and also promote music on. And they had hired me, and I moved down to Atlanta, Georgia. And my best friend from college was also living in Atlanta at the time, and he was working for Sony Music. And I just realized how much cooler his job was than mine. And he actually ended up moving to New York. And I told him to sort of keep an eye out for if anything came about. And he did. And there was a job that came open for a film marketing rep, and I came to New York and I interviewed for it. And I met with a bunch of people at Sony ahead of that interview and like did my homework, and it was great. That's what brought me there. But the transition from being in the South, even though I'd lived in Atlanta for a couple of years, to come to New York, and I lived in Hoboken, by the way, my first year or
Okay,
first
so
2 years I lived in Hoboken.
you were New York with an asterisk.
Yes, I was at my father has a place in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and I was at a bar there with some friends, and I had a New York hat on, and this guy was talking to me, and I said, "Yeah, I live in New York." And he's like, "Where do you live?" I said, "I live in Hoboken." He's like, "You don't live in New York." He's like, "Don't say that. You live in New Jersey." I was like, "Touche."
Right.
Yeah,
You're New York
yeah, I
adjacent.
was New
You're the
York.
closest thing to New York without actually being in New York.
Exactly. Yeah, just a river between us. Whatever.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would have to imagine, right? Like, I've been to Atlanta a handful of
Hmm.
times because my brother and my dad live down there,
Oh, nice.
and I mean, it's a city,
Hmm.
but it ain't New York.
Right.
And I've never been to a small town in North Carolina, so I don't really know what that's like.
Right.
And I love asking questions about sort of the rural versus suburban versus urban thing,
Sure.
just because I've lived in New York City for the majority of my life. I was born here.
Right.
For the most part, grew up here. I'm accustomed to this in a way that a lot of people aren't. So for you, being this kid from a small town and then moving to a city, but there's a huge difference between Atlanta and New York, and no disrespect to
No,
Atlanta
no,
at
no.
all,
Like,
but there's a big, big, big. So taking those steps and also kind of moving from the south to the
hmm
north, I think is another thing in and of itself. What was that transition like for you?
wow, it was such a life change. Because you're right, Atlanta was a much bigger version of what I was coming from in a lot of ways. Whereas New York, I mean, it was, I lived right on the Hudson, and the days that I had to go to 550 Madison, I would take the ferry across and then to get on a bus. And then it was like a 3 block walk from there to come. And I remember the first couple of times I did that, I was like, I'm taking a boat and a bus to get to work. Like that alone was a trip. It was just such an odd experience for me. And it took
Yeah, you're
some,
not just pulling the car into a parking lot.
yeah, exactly. And it definitely took some adjustment. I was living in a much smaller place, and you know how that is. You got to figure out your life. You got to get rid of some things. You know,
Lose all of your non-essential
exactly.
belongings.
Yeah, there's something great about that in a way. You kind of carve down your life to something very specific, and but yeah, it was very much a total different mind shift, and everything from that to just I remember. I don't know if you remember, there was a pizza place right around the corner from at Sony. It was probably one of those famous Ray's
I
pizzas.
mean,
There's like
yeah,
90 of
I
them.
mean,
Yeah,
yeah, one of the
exactly.
800,000 raised
Uh,
pizzas that all claim to be the
right, the
original.
original Ray's, right? Yeah, it was one of
Yes.
those.
Yeah.
And I remember going there with some friends, my first kind of experience in grabbing some New York pizza, and we got in a line, and they had I had some pizzas out, and I thought, because my experience with that kind of thing was like, okay, well, if they don't have a pepperoni or sausage, you could just ask, when they'll tell you when they're gonna. And this is at lunchtime, peak lunchtime, right? There's a line of
Oh
people,
man,
and
I already know where
yeah,
this is
and I
going.
stepped up and I looked across the pizza. I was like, hey, are you guys gonna have any pepperoni and mushroom? And the guy looked at me and said, what? I said, are you gonna bring out any pepperoni and mushroom? And he looked at me, and he looked at the guy behind me and said, next. And that was my first realization that, you know what, time is essential in New York, and you got to know what you're doing, and you got to be ready, and they're not going to wait for you.
Yeah, man. And it's not a rudeness thing.
No, it's not.
It is a definite time is money,
It's an
you
efficiency,
know.
right? It's
Yeah,
efficient, and yeah, I realized real quick. Don't take it personally. You just got to be efficient.
right. Um so one thing that when we last saw each other, I didn't get to go into a whole lot and I was very curious about is how you ended up in education.
Oh yeah, another really interesting turn of events. I was online dating, as you do, at the very sort of wild.
Oh wait, I did ask you this and you
y-
answered it, but I'm going to ask you again.
Yes, it was
Sorry.
the wild west of Tinder days, and I had connected with someone, and at this time, with the app, you had to be in a like certain radius to connect with someone. So like you couldn't meet somebody in LA when you were in New York or anything like.
Right.
And so I connected with someone, and we met up, and we had a great like coffee hang. Um, and it turned out that she was a professor at the University of Miami, but she was from Long Island, and she was there visiting her family, and had been on the app. And so we just talked for a long time, back and forth on the app, and then eventually on text and conversations. And then she eventually came back up to the city, and the more we hung out, the more we liked hanging out. And so then I went to Miami to visit her. And at the same time, I was working with Benji Rogers at Pledge Music. And
Hmm.
we were starting to try to get the curriculum of crowdfunding into some of the universities. And we actually did that at Berkeley. And I said, well, hey, I'm going to be down in Miami. What if I meet with the music business faculty and see if they'll be interested in that? And so I did, and they happen to be looking for someone to sort of be like a business development person and sort of a liaison to bring things to the school. And I just said, and they were like, were you interested? And I was like, well, I'd love to talk about it. And then I got the call about it during a really like harsh, one of those February New York blizzards where it's already black snow on the ground. You know what I'm talking
Yes,
about.
I
Yeah,
do. I know
it's
exactly what
like
you're
the black
talking
snow
about.
was hanging around just long enough for more to come on top of it. And they literally called me
You
in the
know,
middle of one of those and was like, "Hey, how did you feel about coming to Miami?" I was like, "Yeah,
yeah,
I
fuck
feel great
this.
about
Hell
it."
yes.
Like,
Yes.
so that's what brought me
Yep.
down. It wasn't a plan that I had to be in music education in any way, shape, or form. That was just, it was an opportunity, and I gotten a little beat down with, the city, and I felt like, man, I'm still in the same apartment for 10 years now. So that was it, really.
Did you ever picture yourself as an educator?
No, not at all. I mean, I wasn't even thinking about college then, other than like, what we were doing with college reps and how we were marketing,
Sure.
like that was my extent,
Right.
It didn't occur to me at all to be an educator, none of that. I just kind of like, I got there, and in looking for things to work into the school and looking for ways to help our students at that time, I started to realize that, wow, this is really invigorating to me. Like it's really like it's bringing me back to, seeing people in that same position as passionate as I was, and more so, and artists and young artists and their take on the world and the things that they like. And I realized quickly, like, wow, I've been in this New York City bubble in the music industry, but there's a whole other world outside of that.
Mm.
And these are the people that are coming up through that world, and it started to change my outlook on things. And then eventually I started doing some master classes and just talking to students. And then I found another passion for it as well, which was like actually learning from them as much as I was hopefully giving back.
Right. That's an interesting point. And the last person I had on the show who was an educator who also teaches music students
Hmm.
kind of said the same thing, that it's, the idea of education is that it's not just one way.
Right.
You're learning as you're teaching,
Hmm.
and you're teaching as you're learning. And I would love for you to just go into a little bit more depth about what that experience has been like for you.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. You think about it in the beginning, or at least I did, in a sense of, oh, I'm going to impart this great wisdom on these people, like, and then you realize, like, okay, they're young, and certainly there's things that you're passing on to them that they don't know and need to know, but also they're teaching you about their perspective on it and the music world that they're coming from, and they really have a grasp of, you know for at that time Instagram was just becoming like really popular as a means to promote yourself and market yourself. It was kind of that time period where Instagram was really blowing up, and I had students who were mastering it. They were, talking teaching me about some of the ways you could use Instagram at that time and some of the things that they were doing. And that I knew what was happening. I knew how to speak to it from a marketing perspective. But I think there's a difference between people who are using it and people who are actually kind of living in it. And that was really eye-opening to me, that some of them were already far along that path and just trying to figure out the rest of it.
Younger people have a different relationship with the internet, social media, technology
Yes.
than we do.
Hmm.
And I think, again, it goes back to sort of the cultural exchange aspect of it. I think there's things about it that they can teach us, and there's things about maybe not being on it that we can teach them.
100%. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. And that
um,
that really, what you just said is exactly right. It informed me in a lot of ways. But then I also felt like, and I still feel like, we can speak to, we're looking at it from a different view of how it can be detrimental as well as helpful. And I think it's, look, it's always the hardest thing to do is, read the label from inside the bottle. And it
mm,
takes,
mm.
you need some perspective on things.
I love that. It's hard to read the label from inside the bottle.
Yeah.
I've never heard that before. I'm going to remember that, and I'm going to use that
You're
in the future.
welcome to it. I might have stolen it from, I think, Scott Galloway, so I'll have to give him credit. But yeah, that's
Okay,
true.
man. Trying to think of what my next line of questioning is. Outside of music and marketing, you know, this is a trope almost. People say that being around young people keeps them young.
Mm.
Is this something you experience? Like, what are you learning from Gen Z, like outside of music stuff?
Oh yeah. Well, I do think that to an extent. I think, look, their perspectives on relationships, communication, anxieties, masculinity are very different from what our generation thinks about it and talks about it. And I think I certainly, and this is just personal to me, I have a lot more empathy for that than I would have, I think, had I not been this involved with people of their age group, because it's easy, I think, for us to look at it and say, well, yeah, you're anxious because of this, and this. Come on, that's everyday life,
Right,
like, you
right.
got to let that roll off your shoulder, but, those are real issues and problems that they're dealing with, and they're dealing with it on a different level than we are. We didn't have the constant feedback of, or mirror to, everybody's fabulous life that we don't have. You know what I mean? Like, we weren't looking at that every day when we pulled, oh, we didn't have phones that had stuff on it, but I mean, you're just not, you're seeing that every day. and you're getting that, magnified to you. And that creates real issues if depending on, what your mental outlook is like. And, it's hard to speak. I think it's hard for our generation to see that and understand it because we didn't have it, but it's real.
There's 100% an empathy piece that needs to be spoken about and put into practice. I mean, God knows if when I was in high school we had social media and smartphones, like my experience would have been significantly different, and I'm not sure if it would have been better or it would have been worse, and it might have been both.
Same. Yeah. I kind of think it would have been both. I really do.
Yeah.
Like I would have loved to have had that ability to connect with people. And, I grew up in a small rural southern town. I knew everybody and everybody, what everybody, it's like watching the Andy Griffith show, if you ever seen that, like, I mean,
Well, what was how many people? This is actually a good question to ask. How many people were in your graduating class in high school?
oh man, we had a pretty big number because it was the only high school. So I want to say it was like
Aha.
200, maybe 250. I don't know. That might have been, I might be a little off on that, but I think that's roughly around what it was.
Which you say pretty big. My graduating class was
There you
1,200.
go. There you go. Yeah.
So it's all about the
Yeah,
scale, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
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 But yeah, I mean, again, I don't know a whole lot about the rural existence, but when I speak to people that live in places that are not cities, particularly people like our age, they're like, look, if you lived in a small town, you knew everybody, everybody knew you. The lady at the grocery store that packed your groceries like knew you and your mama and
Mm-hmm.
like everybody else. And I mean, I think I got a little bit of that just in like a neighborhood sense
Yep.
where like, everybody on the block knew my grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was kind of that too. So I understand that. And I think having, the ability for young people and even us to have those outside perspectives now kind of for those of us that really like lean into the educating ourselves and gaining a broader perspective is super, super
Yep.
helpful. It takes us out of our comfort zone. And some people react differently to being forced out of their comfort zone. Some people are like, oh shit, there's all this stuff to learn. I'm going to learn more. And then some people are like, oh, I don't want to learn all this stuff. I'm just going to
Right.
like
Just hold
retreat
on
in
into that.
further.
Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting, and I hadn't thought about this until you said it, but like that's probably why I've gravitated towards, I lived in the West Village in New York, and it felt like a neighborhood, like the West Village feels like a neighborhood,
Right.
and I live now in Los Angeles and I live in Los Feliz and it feels like a neighborhood. And so I guess in a way I have, I love that knowing the person, seeing the same people in the morning when I walk to get a coffee or whatever, whatever it may be. I guess I still hold on to that from my childhood, but I'm also, and we are also, and with social media and technology, we're able to connect with people all over the world and see different experiences and learn different things. And I think that would have made a big difference for me in if we'd had that when we were younger, you know. But then you
Right.
throw on all the negatives and the bullying and all other things, and I don't know how I would have reacted to that, you know.
Yeah, it really is a whole different level of skills
Hmm.
that folks are dealing with now compared to when we were younger. And I love that you have the perspective of working with younger people to sort of be able to understand where that's coming from.
Yeah, it really does open your eyes. And before, I would like to think that I would still been empathetic, but probably not to the level that I am now. And it's easy to dismiss somebody's feelings if something seems trite or small to you, but you've got to put that in perspective, especially with young adults who are dealing with things like we said that we don't have to deal with, or I didn't have to deal with on such a magnified level,
Yeah.
and that's absolutely true. Um, and I learned, I mean, I can remember when, well, certainly, just going through the pandemic and seeing how that shut down lives. And then when everything happened with George Floyd and protesting and things like that, and I saw the way young kids were using social media and using the things to affect change was really, eye opening. and speaking to them on a personal level. I remember the first time and I have a cousin who was a parole. He's a police officer and used to work in a jail for years. So my first reaction to defund the police was like, what are you talking about, defund the police? But I had a conversation with some of my students, and it was a really informative conversation back and forth about, okay, well, here's what that means and what it means to them and why some of them are supporting it. And here's where I'm coming from and my angle of it. And it was, I loved it. I learned, and I think they learned, and we were able to sort of like, oh, okay, there's common levels here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, understanding perspective. I think there is a tendency for older folks to just like dig in and be like, oh, well, I know better because I'm older. Maybe I'm just projecting the experience that I had with my parents and my elders on this whole conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But it does feel like there's, like you kind of have to talk to people and get like a wider, like a more 360-degree
Yeah.
perspective, because your experience is not my experience, nor is it anybody else's experience, and there's room for multiple experiences and multiple perspectives.
And it opens you up, especially from the standpoint of teaching. If you learn to listen to then be heard, and you can connect, I think it makes you more effective at the things you're trying to get across, because you can put it in sort of a funnel of which that they understand, and and you're also understanding where they're coming from, and to me that makes a big difference in the way you teach, and the way you learn in that same process.
Right. Right. We're talking about this sort of empathy and learning. And one thing that you sort of brought up tangentially that I think is a really good takeaway that we can get from younger people is emotional intelligence. And, I think there's been a shift, right? Where there was a point in time when everybody valued book smarts.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you knew all of this stuff, it was great. You were super intelligent. Like, your intelligence was based on how much information you retained.
Right.
And we didn't talk much about emotional intelligence. But the idea of emotional intelligence, knowing who you are, understanding why you do the things that you do, is, there's more awareness of it now. So, which I guess is emotional intelligence in and of itself,
Sure.
you know, but also I think more people are doing that work. I mean, this podcast is all about that
Mm-hmm.
work. What has that experience been like for you? What has that journey been like for you?
Well, it's interesting, and especially with working with young people, right? Like we've already said, they have the access to that and they're learning it at an earlier age. I wasn't thinking about emotional intelligence when I was in college. And also what you just said about the way things are taught, and it's that learned skills, right? It's that learned acquired knowledge and then the regurgitation of that. I think that's changing for the better, certainly in educating people, where we're learning that emotional intelligence and that ability to assess things and look at a problem and figure out how to navigate that is a little different than memorizing what the answer is to it. Um, and it's more important in my opinion. Not It's as important in my opinion. You know, I just wish I want that access for everyone, and I think that's where we're failing, and we meaning the way we're looking at higher education now. I think we're failing some people in that standpoint, but we're helping them in others, and emotional intelligence is one of those
Right. How have you applied that to yourself?
areas. That's a great question, man. I am I'm a work in progress. I think as we all are.
We all are.
You
Yeah.
know, if we meet
That
somebody
is
that
you
isn't,
just
we gotta, we really need
you're
to
right.
have them on the podcast. But
You're right. You just summarized this podcast in a
yeah, I'm a
nutshell.
work in
You just
progress.
take that. We're working from
Um,
yes, 100.
yeah,
percent
I've learned not to jump to conclusions as much as I used to. I've learned a lot more patience, and I've also learned to let things go that are, there's just either I can't control, I can't do anything about, or my, you know, once I've given my opinion, my expertise, or whatever it may be, just let that ride. And whatever those decisions are that that person makes, if it's someone I'm working with, if it's a student that I'm talking to, if it's both, then you've got to let that be. And sometimes they're going to make a decision that isn't necessarily what you recommend, and that's just, you've got to let people learn. They have to learn just like we do. And whether I feel like I'm 100% right, there's times when I've thought that, and turns out, no, I wasn't right. Like, and
it's
yeah,
humbling,
it is
but it
humbling.
is
Yeah,
necessary.
it is.
Yeah.
But that's where you learn. You learn that, and yeah, like, I've learned to let things go. Yeah, and I'm doing a better job with time management now as far as that goes. I used to be. I was in that grind and in that hustle for a long time. And now it's like, all right, it's time for me to take some me time.
As it should be. And it, you know, as another person that it took a while to make that realization, like I relate. You know, I, I was talking to somebody, or someone was talking to me actually earlier today, and one thing that's come up in conversation a lot recently is not letting your career define you,
Hmm.
not letting like who you are be, I work for XYZ, or I do XYZ for
Hmm.
XYZ. And I think in the entertainment industry, particularly, and I think it happens in other fields too, maybe in medicine, where your identity, your identity is really tied to what you do for work, and B, it's prestigious or sexy
Hmm.
to say that, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I manage this band, I work for this record company, I work with these
Yes.
artists. Like, it makes people's ears perk up. So I think we kind of fall into a habit of letting that be the first thing that anybody knows about
Hmm.
us. But I often think that I almost completely think that that's like detrimental, because we are whole people outside of the things that we do for work.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Earlier today, I had lunch with a old colleague from our Sony days, and she and I go back a long way, and she's still in the industry and still doing great things, and she's such a connector, and we could spend our entire time talking about all kinds of things, business related and otherwise. But we were talking about kids and life, and there's something like that. I'm learning that exchange is as valuable, if not more valuable, for me, as kind of like that soul feeding energy, as it is for me to, find out if so and so is connected to so and so, so I can get this thing done for my producer or something like that. Like, yeah. And frankly, I met with my producer, the producer I managed this morning, and we had a lot of things to talk about on sort of our agenda, the things we had to discuss, the artists he's working with. But we spent the beginning of it talking about how much he enjoys climbing gyms now, like,
All right.
and like, that's been his soul food, if you will. And he gets up earlier now, and he's not that person who he was 5 years ago, or yeah, when he graduated college, when his identity was, I'm a producer, this is what I do, I'm in the studio 24 hours a day. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Right.
like, oh no, he's figuring out that there are other things to life, and that ultimately has helped him in his pursuit with his career. And I think if you find that balance, look, I would love to spend my day figuring out if I enjoy surfing, and maybe tomorrow, like, you know what I mean? Like, I would love to do that. You got to have that balance. It's not like
Right.
your hustle to work just goes away. But if you can find that balance, it seems like such a better existence. And I think ultimately helps you on both areas, your health, your mental health, and also your ability to relate to people in your job.
100%. 100%. We're on the same page there. I'm going to lightning round you with a
Love
couple
it.
of
Let's do
questions.
it.
All right. You mentioned soul food just now. What is your soul food? Or what are they? Might be
Are we
multiple.
talking actual food, or are we talking about, things that,
Let's not talk about actual food because I'm hungry.
okay,
So,
we definitely won't do that. Okay, my soul food,
like, what brings you joy?
right. I love getting out in nature, and now that I live in LA. Griffith Park behind me. It's oddly one of those things. I've never been a huge camping nature person. I mean, I've enjoyed it from time to time, but never been like, but now that I live here, I find myself walking and doing trails and so I'm still scared to death of coyotes, but they haven't bothered. So yeah,
Well, coyotes don't eat people; they eat
they don't. Yeah,
dogs,
they
don't
usually
they?
don't go after people, but if you see them, when you encounter them on a trail, it's a little bit jarring when you first. You're like, whoa.
I'm 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 fine never encountering a coyote.
And
I
they hunt
think.
in packs too, and they're very smart. So, just saying. But yeah, I enjoy that. That certainly feeds me, and it's something that I haven't necessarily looked to beforehand. And now I'm into it.
Nice. If there was one thing, I'll rephrase that slightly. What is one thing that you thought you knew about being a boy, man, masculine person, whatever it is, that you realized as you've gotten older you had to completely unlearn?
Something that I thought I knew that had to I think I had that traditional definition of masculinity, you got to be tough. I've always worked out, but I can honestly say, and my body is here to prove it now because it's starting to fall apart, that I was doing it to build muscles to attract people from the opposite sex. Like I wasn't doing it for the altruistic value of being healthy for a long time. And I think I had that sort of traditional definition of it. And now I realize, like, one of the biggest things about masculinity should be having the strength to serve others just as much as yourself, and that doesn't mean physical strength necessarily, but if you can be in service of others, if you can mentor young people, you can mentor young men, you know, that to me is much of a superpower of what I feel like is masculinity now than it is, trying to develop a six pack that I never got to.
You do mention the body falling apart,
Hmm.
and you're still in pretty good shape.
I'm
So,
hanging in there, man.
you know,
I'm hanging in
right.
there.
I don't think you're dad bodding it,
I'm not
Brian.
dad bodding it yet, but if my Achilles goes out on me one more time, it's gonna be questionable. There's way more days off now, Mike.
Well, I will send good wishes to your Achilles.
Appreciate it.
And last question.
Hmm.
You live in LA,
Hmm.
but you're teaching at a school in Florida, and I'm not 100% sure about this, but I'm also assuming your partner still lives in Florida.
Hmm. Yep.
How do you manage, how do you keep those relationships working?
Well, so first of all, with the teaching thing, I teach during the summer camp, which is both great and ridiculous because I'm in the middle of Florida and the southern tip of Florida in July, which is, an experience that you don't want to have if you don't like hot weather.
Yeah, I mean, you don't just melt.
Yes, you don't you really have to be careful because you can melt. It's extremely hot. So, and then, when I design courses and stuff, I can do that remotely. And we have a lot of professors that teach remotely now, you literally go into a classroom and they're on a Zoom and, there's all kinds of different ways, which is a unique experience in and of itself. As far as my partner goes, we are no longer boyfriend and girlfriend, but we are great friends.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
The distance thing is tough, and if you're in that situation, or people listening to this are in that situation, it's tough to do that. However, we talk probably once every other day. We're in each other's lives. We're working together on projects, and that experience is it's almost like we have opened up a whole new chapter of our relationship, um, that would otherwise be sad, but it's not because we're actually the best of friends, and we complain about each other's families, and we're like, I mean, we're just we're best of friends, which is beautiful, and something that I didn't expect, and something that I greatly cherish.
It's interesting, and this has also come up in conversation recently. When a relationship, a romantic relationship, partnership
Hmm.
ends, like the societal expectation is that the two of you will hate each
Yep.
other. But if you were in a relationship with somebody, you could, presumably went into the relationship with this person because you really liked them.
Right. Yeah.
And the like shouldn't necessarily go away just because you've decided that you're incompatible as, a couple or lovers or
Yeah.
whatever it
Yeah.
is. Right?
Yeah. And we've
Like,
grown to you grow to learn everything about a person, especially, in a longer term relationship. And yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, we've both said to each other, like, there's no point where we don't want to be in each other's lives as far as, the things we're doing. She's in a early stages of a new relationship, and I don't want to hear every detail of that, but I am very supportive. And
sure.
if she needs me, I'm there for it, and we've talked about it a little bit, and vice versa. If I'm not in that situation currently, but if I am, I know she'll be there for me for that too. Yeah, I mean, she's a great person. Like, I've spent all this time, like, and we've cultivated a great relationship that way. Why in the world would I just want that to end for some construct that really doesn't, match the reality of our situation anyway? That's the way I feel about it.
I love that. And actually, I thought of one last question.
Yes.
So, you've had all these experiences. You've lived in Atlanta, you lived in New York, you live in LA.
Mm-hmm.
When you go back home,
Mm-hmm.
what does it feel like now that you've had all of this experience in other bigger, broader places
When I
behind
go
you?
back to North Carolina to the family,
Yeah.
used to feel like, certainly when I lived in New York, and I would go back with my head high, and I'm the big city guy, you can't tell me anything, and you have one coffee place, I have 12 on my block, that kind of stuff. you
Right.
know
Right.
Now I appreciate the way the not only the I mean, my family's, I should say this, my family's all moved out of the hometown that I lived in. Nobody lives in the,
Oh,
most of my father lives in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and the rest of my family lives around the Raleigh area. So it's not like they're, Barney and Andy aren't coming to arrest anyone. They've moved on. But
wait, was the Andy Griffith Show actually set in North Carolina?
it was set in the fictitious town of Mayberry.
Station of
Right,
Mayberry.
right.
Right. That could have been
Right,
anywhere.
could have been, but there's a town called Mount Pilot that they reference in the Andy Griffith Show that they kind of, loosely based it on, and
Okay.
it's one of those things where you can go there and you can visit the jail that actually never existed, and you can see the car that never, like that. But yeah, I feel like, now when I go back, I really appreciate, the lifestyle there and the things they're doing, and I have a great time, like, I really do. I get to see people. I don't live there, but I get a taste of it, in all different ways. And look, I mean, like, they've certainly caught up on, at least in the Raleigh area, they've caught up on five-star restaurants and artisanal cheese and all that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, it's,
Yes. All that city shit.
yeah, and not for nothing, but the houses don't cost as much as they do in LA there. So, I
That's
can
right.
appreciate it, and I do appreciate it. And I'm not moving home next year. I'm not going to, unless something happens, but I love going home now, and I love being there and experiencing it.
I love it. I love it. All right. Well, I'm going. Thank you so much, Brian, for being on the show. Great to reconnect. Thank you, Folk Alliance, for engineering quietly or unknowingly engineering this reunion. Thank you to Marnie, our mutual friend Marnie, for also sort of unknowingly engineering this reunion. And if you would like to know more about Brian Wilkins, you can follow him on Instagram at bwilk137, BWILK137. Thanks again, Brian. Appreciate you. Thank you for listening to Detoxicity. I hope you found this particular episode interesting. And if you are new, I hope you go back and listen to all of the older episodes. Once again, my name is Mike Joseph. I am the host and producer of this show. And there are a lot of things that you can do to continue to support our mission, continue to support this podcast. Follow me on social media. I am on Instagram, Twitter, and I'm on TikTok as DetoxPod Guy. You can also send me an email if you'd like. I'm at detoxpod@gmail.com. I am always on the hunt for people with interesting, inspirational, and powerful stories. So if you know somebody who fits that bill, or if you yourself fit that bill, please don't hesitate to drop me a line via email or via social media. Please make sure you subscribe on your podcast platform that you're listening to this on. Rate, comment, help a brother out, help us move up in the rankings. Follow me on social media. Like I said, follow our Patreon, or subscribe to my Patreon, actually. Patreon.com/detoxicitypod. You get access to exclusive episodes. You get episodes a little earlier than the general public. You get a cool ass sticker, lots of stuff. Once again, patreon.com/detoxicitypod. Quick shout out to Calvin Williams for providing the music and doing his magic on the logo, which was originally designed by Jacob Block. I thank you all for listening. I wish you all the best. Please take care of each other. Till next time, peace.